Hello. As you know, this is part of our podcast series where we have the luxury of introducing some of our colleagues who are very passionate about the area of inclusion and who have overlapping work and qualifications that give us an important point of view on the issue of inclusion. And the connection in this case is the connection between inclusion and happiness, which is such an incredible and exciting topic. And not just happiness in our personal life, but happiness in our business life as well. So I am here with my colleague, Tal-Ben Shahar, who I had the luxury of meeting through the MG 100s. I know all of you know about the MG 100s by now, but we are basically part of Marshall Goldsmith's legacy team. Marshall is the top executive coach in the country. And so I have had the luxury of being surrounded by these incredible minds and learning from them. And hopefully they're learning from me as well. And now we have the opportunity to learn together. So as you're not new to the series, you already know I'm Denise Hummel, and I am the founder and chief innovation officer of Lead Inclusively. Lead Inclusively, as you know, is a technology-enabled diversity and inclusion consulting firm working with mostly enterprise-sized clients. But those enterprise clients are filled with people like you and me. They're leaders, and they're trying really hard to be good leaders, to have successful outcomes. And to do that, we want teams that are empowered and enabled. And the happier we are, as you know, the better we show up in terms of our leaders and the better results that we can have. So having said that, I want to turn it over to you, Tal, and get a little bit of an introduction on your amazing qualifications and what you're up to as a context for the questions that are to come.
Thank you, Denise. Thank you for having me on your podcast, and thank you for the work that you're doing. And we'll get into it, but as you know, I think it is very important for individual, team, organizational, and societal well-being. And by well-being, I mean much more than happiness, also for success. So my name is Tal-Ben Shahar. I got interested in the topic of happiness, which is what I do today, because of my own unhappiness. 30 years or so ago, I was an undergraduate at Harvard studying computer science. And I found myself in my sophomore year doing well academically, doing well in sports. I played squash, doing quite well socially, and yet being very unhappy. And I remember one very cold Boston morning getting out of bed somehow, going to my academic advisor and telling her, I've had it, I'm switching majors. And she said, what to? And I said, well, I'm leaving computer science and moving over to philosophy and psychology. And she said, why? And I said, because I have two questions. The first question is, why aren't I happy? Second question, how can I become happier? And it's with these questions that I then went on to get my undergraduate as well as graduate degrees, and actually did become happier and wanting to share what I'd learned with others. And that's when I also started to teach. And that's what I've been doing, around this area of happiness, delving deeply also into the area of leadership and bringing them together.
So, and just tell us a little bit of what degree did you ultimately, or degrees did you ultimately get?
Yeah, so undergraduate was philosophy and psychology. Then I went over to the other Cambridge in England and read education, and then back to Harvard for a PhD in organizational behavior, which is a joint degree between business and psychology.
Okay, gotcha. Now, tell people about the Happiness Academy. So you were kind enough to give me access to that incredible course, and I have to tell you, it has had great meaning in my life. I am a very happy person in many respects, partially because I was blessed by getting into this incredible career where I actually have so much meaning in my life. I have just a phenomenal team. I don't know how I got that lucky, but I do. two great children, both healthy. I have my health. I have phenomenal friends, but I'm, in a relationship transition, from a long-term relationship to being alone. And, all of a sudden I found myself really just lonely and unhappy and confused because everything else was firing and I couldn't understand why I was spending so much time dwelling on the one thing that wasn't working. It was just weird. And so when you were kind enough to give me access to a program that is so amazing. I thought, well, at first, to be honest, I was kind of skeptical. I thought, Happiness Academy, what is this? So, in as much as I am now completely converted, I wanted to ask you though, what I understand that it came from your heart, of exploration and all that, but obviously the structure of the program is so significant. I mean, you cover just about every aspect of life in such a meaningful way. Apart from your own personal experience, how did you figure out the structure of the program that would be sure to create some real meaning? In other words, some actual results that people would experience on a consistent basis.
Yeah, so in many ways, the field of happiness studies is on a personal level is the culmination of the work that I've been doing over the last 30 years, which focuses on synthesizing the work of many others. At some point in quite early on in my academic career, I decided that actually doing research is not my strength nor my passion, but where my strengths and passions lie is as a synthesizer, as a bridge builder, bringing together disciplines, bringing together different eras. So drawing on ancient philosophy, modern research on biology, history, and psychology. So in many ways, this is what the happiness studies approach is all about. The idea came to me not that long ago, about 4 years ago. I was on a flight, on a transatlantic flight, and those days where you're on a flight and you're not comfortable, you're exhausted, but not exhausted enough to fall asleep. So one of those states, and I think that many people who fly long distance can relate to it. So I was in one of those states, and then a question came to mind, and the question was, how is it that there is a field of study for psychology, which is my field of business, or history, or biology, or geography, you name it, and there is no field of study for happiness? Yes, there is positive psychology, which is where I spent my time, but that's just the psychology of happiness. What about what theologians had to say about happiness, and philosophers, and economists and neuroscientists? Why isn't there a field, or rather an interdisciplinary field of study relating to happiness? And that was the question, and if I was exhausted until that point on that flight, from that point on, I was very energized. In many ways, I felt like I was touching, which was something which was, I thought, important, but on a personal level, went very, very deep. In many ways, as I said, bringing together a lot of what I'd spent the previous 25 years doing. So I decided to help create an interdisciplinary field of happiness studies, bringing philosophy and psychology and history and literature and film all to bear on what I've come to call life's ultimate currency, the currency of happiness. And today you're a part of the first certificate program on the topic. We're also literally, as we speak, creating the world's first master's degree and soon to be PhD degree in happiness studies. And again, this is something that you talked about finding meaning in your work, and it really is. I feel privileged to be doing this every day, to be synthesizing, integrating the great minds and hearts of of our species to bear on perhaps the, or at least one of the most important questions. How can we increase levels of well-being in ourselves, in our families, in our organizations, in our society?
It's just incredibly exciting. I mean, talk about meaningful work. If we don't have happiness, you know, everything pretty much stems from that after food and water and shelter and love. Um, so let me ask you, in terms of tying in, you know, our work together and at the heart of why I have you on this show, can you describe to me, please, in your estimation, the connection between the whole concept of inclusion and inclusive behaviors, inclusivity generally, and overall happiness, both on a personal basis, and if you could also extrapolate that to the business environment, that would be very helpful.
Sure. You know, Carl Rogers, the psychologist, once said that what is most personal is most general. You know, for me, this whole idea of inclusion has always been something which was very personal, and very personal on not on a conscious level. Mm-hmm. You know, both my parents are very inclusive by nature. You know, if you know, my mom's a teacher, my dad's an engineer, but if, you know, someone had to describe them, you know, in a couple of words about both of them, they would say they're very inclusive, very open to other people, accepting. So, you know, being raised, I was very fortunate to be raised in this in this environment, and it became, you know, part of me. You know, I you know, like a fish doesn't think about water. You know, I didn't think about inclusiveness explicitly until I started to teach, actually. And I remember the first experience. You know, I was teaching my class on positive psychology, and the class you know, started off with 6 students the first year. Then, you know, second year I had 300 students, and by the third year it became the biggest class at Harvard, and with you know, close to 900 students. And I was teaching a class, and at the end of one class, a student came on stage and said to me, it was an African-American student, said to me, "Tal, I really want to thank you for this class." And I said, "Sure, you know, I'm glad it's helping." He said, no, but I want to thank you for something else." And I said, "What?" And he said, "For using so many examples from the African-American and African community in general." And I said to him, "Sure." And until that point, I didn't really think about the fact that I was using many examples because they seemed so obvious. You know, so the whole class begins with Marva Collins. Marva Collins she passed away a few years ago, was a school teacher in inner city Chicago. I read her book, and after reading her book, I decided that I wanted to be a teacher. She helped transform hundreds and thousands of lives, including my own. So it felt natural to me to start with Marva Collins. You know, and her father was African American, her mother was Native American, an extraordinary woman who I really hoped would win a Nobel Prize when she was still alive. But I hope she gets the recognition that she deserves. You know, I talked about the importance, you know, about the importance of meaning and setting goals and having dreams. I mean, who else would you use for having dreams but the man who said, "I have a dream"? And you know, and example after example where it seemed to be, you know, the natural right fit, not because I came from a place of inclusion, but after that conversation with the students, I started being more aware of it. So it was from, you know, sort of, you know, I went from unconscious competent in this realm to conscious competent, which was important because I realized then that, you know, I was fortunate to be raised in a family like this, but most people are not. Our society has not yet internalized the importance, to me, the non-brainer of inclusion. And I became more aware of it since, and and have been doing a lot of work, and also started reading research on it, showing just how beneficial it is for happiness and for success. And this is an important connection that I often make in my lectures between happiness and success, two sides of the same coin, flourishing.
Let me just ask you, because what you're describing, you know, at least if my listening skills are good, is how diversity, or keeping an open mind and getting information on whatever source you can without any sort of biased filter is important. So that's the diversity part of diversity and inclusion, which, by the way, what you shared with us is extremely valuable. On the inclusive side, so on diversity and inclusion, inclusion is the mindset, that curiosity mindset of being able to accept the differences in others, and also having a natural curiosity about those differences. Some other concepts of inclusion in terms of inclusive behaviors are leaders who can be unbiased in their decision making, so objective in their decision making, as well as transparent in their decision making. And so in terms of that inclusive mindset, so the actual ability to accept the differences in others rather than judge them, and being curious and open about those differences, how does that increase a person's happiness, both personally and in the workplace?
Yeah, oh, big time, big time. You know, so I go back to Confucius, you know, his work on the Analects, which in many ways defined Chinese, to a great extent Japanese, and Korean cultures for thousands of years. So one of my favorite stories in the Analects, and I love its simplicity, is goes something like this. So Confucius walks into a temple, and in the temple he begins to ask people questions. You know, he asks questions of the instructors there, and he asks questions of the people who clean, and he asks questions of everyone. And then he hears two students at the back saying, the master is asking too many questions. This is not good form. Now he overhears them and says, no, asking questions, that is good form. And you know, I told my children just recently, I read them this excerpt. So, you know, kids can understand it. And of course, it's a very important lesson at any age. This curiosity of asking questions is so important. And it comes from a place, and I did this exercise with my kids where I asked them, okay, so what does asking questions say about that person? A person who asks many questions, what does it say about that person? And you know, and my daughter said, well, it means that you know, Confucius is very curious, that, you know, he really wants to learn. And I said, what else does it say about him? You know, and we talk, and then she says, and also he's humble. And I said, right. Now, why is he humble? Because a person who says, who asks questions is saying, I don't know. And if you think about it, you know, if Confucius is considered the founder of Asian philosophy, then Socrates can be considered the founder of Western philosophy. And what did Socrates famously said? He said, you know, I may be the smartest person in Athens, which is what people said about him. The reason, though, is because I know that I don't know.
Exactly.
Again, coming from that place of not knowing. Now, this was right 2,500 years ago when these two sages, you know, roamed our world. It's even more so today when there is so much knowledge and wisdom and information out there. No person can know more than just, you know, a sliver of the totality of it all. And right. The people who will, again, and this comes to the practical aspect of curiosity, the people who ask questions, who are humble enough to say, I don't know, they're the only ones, again, in today's world who can flourish. Now, so this is on the practical, you know, when you talk about organizational success. There are other benefits. Research came out just recently showing that people who are curious actually live longer. Isn't that amazing?
Wow.
Yeah. So,
That related to, because one of the things that comes to mind for me always when we teach this work is the other thing that it demonstrates is that you care. You care about
that's right.
what makes this other human being ticks. You're not only, telling, you're asking. You're not always talking, you're listening, and you're not always taking, you're giving, which to me is directly correlated with happiness as well.
Absolutely. And the thing is, with happiness and success, two sides of the same coin. It's not like, okay, well, I'm sacrificing my long-term success so that I can be happier, or vice versa. They can go hand in hand, and often do. And curiosity is one of those nexus points that connect them together. Because when we're curious, we're certainly happier. It's one of the core characteristics of humans to want to learn, and we're more successful.
It's interesting because, a lot of times too, we're trying to, we are trying to always keep these behaviors top of mind. And it's not always that easy. I mean, the reason that we've developed this inclusion, what we call an inclusion virtual coach app, is because a lot of this learning about behaviors and behavior change that leads to our own happiness and our own success, if we're not getting reinforcement in real time, then it doesn't have relevance. So I see an app in your future, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. And I remind me to talk to you about that, because in designing our app, and the development process has been fascinating. I want to share that with you. But I also wanted to ask you, I found it fascinating, and I also love your story about the fact that I don't think it started purposefully along these lines, but you have one whole module in your Happiness Academy program that is entitled Extraordinary Women, each of whom, were so different in how they were extraordinary. And of course, since gender parity and gender equity is such a significant aspect of what we do, I'm listening to you talk about these women, some of whom I knew, of course, Georgia O'Keeffe. I mean, who doesn't know Georgia O'Keeffe, and Simone de Beauvoir, the same. But you had women like Zora Neale Hurston and Clara Weick-Schumann. And I mean, first of all, I don't know, how did you find them, know of them? What is their contribution to our lives and our happiness? And how did it, I mean, the way you described it to me was almost as if it was a coincidence in a day and age where, we don't even hear about the fact that some of the most extraordinary mathematicians and scientists, for example, of the world were women. We're finding out about it now, decades later, through movies, and the like Hidden Figures, finding
what a great movie.
These extraordinary women of color who, without whom we might not have the space program. And it's like, really? I mean, is this some sort of secret? And so I want to hear more about, and by the way, I have the list in front of me in case you want me to.
Yeah, no, I remember them. So
I had to print it out.
So, the lecture that you're talking about is one where I talk about intellectual well-being, and specifically I talk about Howard Gardner's 9 intelligences. And I decided to have a lecture on each of these intelligences and to exemplify it with with a person. So I started looking, for people whom I admire, and I wrote it, one intelligence, 2 intelligence, and by the 3rd or 4th or 5th, I don't remember when it happened, I realized, hey, they're all women. Oh, how interesting! Why don't I make the whole chapter on women? And the reason, this is where, I go back to where initially unconscious competent goes to conscious competent. I thought about the question that, or what that student told me all those years ago. And I thought how important it is, because how many leadership courses do you have where you learn about great leaders throughout history, and it's all men, or all white men, or there is maybe one or two just so that
thrown in there,
sort of so that it's not too lopsided, but it still is. And I thought, what? So why not have the whole lecture on that? And I had so much fun creating that lecture, and I see it as one of the most important lectures that I put through, because so you talked about Simone de Beauvoir, and again there are many people who talk about Simone de Beauvoir. She was a very important thinker. It's like Margaret Thatcher said, I'm not a woman prime minister, I'm a prime minister.
Right.
You don't say, oh, Tony Blair, he's a man prime minister. He's a prime minister.
Because it's the norm.
Yeah, exactly. So it's it's in the same way. Simone de Beauvoir, such an important thinker, or Georgia O'Keeffe. Her paintings are can teach us so much about truly seeing what is around us, because her focus on details, on the minutiae, and beyond being beautiful, can teach us to be more mindful, and of course that's connected to well-being. But others, Natalie Detroit, she's not well known. She should be well known. This is a woman who was world-class swimmer. She lost the use of her legs. She became and she started competing in the Paralympic Games, and she holds she got gold medals in the All African Games and Commonwealth Games for people who are not disabled. I mean, this is a woman who overcame hardship and difficulty, like no other I know. She should be famous, world famous. Why isn't she?
I had never heard of her before you told me about her.
Yeah. And Peter Drucker,
the profession of empowering women.
Yeah. And again, it's not, it's not you. It's the culture. These people are not out there enough. Now, if I ask people, just let's do a thought experiment. I mean, I've done this with actual people. So how many people, if we ask, have heard of Freud? Many people. How many people have heard of Jung? Many people. If you ask, how many people have heard of Karen Horney? Very few. People in my field, some have maybe even came across, because she talked a lot about neuroses and such. She is, to my mind, the most important psychologist of the 20th century. Where is she? Karen Horney. She wrote a book that changed my life called Self-Analysis. She helped me understand what really positive psychology, which is a new field that everyone talks about, is all about. Karen Horney talked about Freud looking at the dark side, and we need to look more at the light side, the essence of positive psychology. Where is she in our textbooks? Where is she in public lectures? Where is she in movies? Should be more of it. And and I go back, you talked about Hidden Figures. I've seen that movie 3 times. Again, first time out of choice, second and third time because my daughter dragged me to it. And what a powerful, why were they hidden? Why are they hidden? Well, that's what, this is one of the great things that film and popular culture can help with. Other women
that should have been out as a huge movie decades ago.
Exactly right.
It's just unbelievable.
Exactly right. I want to just talk about one more. I mean, I have 9 women there, but just one more. And again, this is a woman who is well known. But and
if it's okay with you, I will, when we post this, I will give them your list. May I do that?
Wonderful. Please. Good. So Rachel Carson, she wrote Silent Spring. I came across it because I took a class on science in the 20th century, and our professor assigned this class. And I fell in love. The first page I read, I was in love with her. She is the one who essentially created the environmentalist movement. So what Al Gore did through Inconvenient Truth, he wouldn't have done it had it not been for Silent Spring. And she argues there brilliantly, and so many of the ideas that we talk about today, she brought it. She should be the most celebrated thinker of the 20th century, scientist. Yeah, some people have read Silent Spring. It was quite popular at that time. She's not a cultural icon, a hero, as she should be. These are exactly the people that should be celebrated. And again, not because they're women, because they're important, because they've changed the world.
It brings up an important point, though, about, I get it that sensationalism, like, fires and bombings and terrorism and all this sells newspaper and the headlines galvanize subscribers and all. I get that. I hate it, but I get it. But one would wonder what it is about women that would in some way attract less press than men, because this is not just about the fact that women don't tend to toot their own horn as much as men do. We're socialized to be more humble, or we're perceived as arrogant or aggressive. So that part is understandable. But what's not understandable is why the media doesn't reinforce it. And I think that could be a podcast in and of itself.
But I want to say something, Denise, something about that. You see, there is research which you're probably familiar with. When students put their hand up in class. So first of all, boys are more likely to put their hand up than girls. Right. But when a boy and a girl put up their hand, the teacher is more likely to call on the boy, even if the teacher is a woman. Exactly. And again, this is what you were talking about making these things conscious, by repetition through an app or, whatever means. And it's the same way with the media. Many writers, men and women, tend to, again, because of the way they were raised or because of what they read or whatever reason, they tend to call on, the men who are more likely to put their hand up. Yep. So from the outset, but even if there is a man and a woman, they're more likely to call on the man. And this is something that we need to raise to awareness.
Agreed. Sort of a little bit related to that, since we're on the topic of men and women, what are the ways in which men and women differ in their approach to happiness? Is there a difference?
Yes. So if you look at the overall levels of happiness, there isn't much of a difference. However, if you look at why some men are happy and are unhappy, and why women happy or unhappy, there are differences. Okay. So women tend to be the women who are unhappy tend to be unhappy because they overanalyze and ruminate.
Oh my gosh, into that category, big.
And again, what I'm talking about now, it exists in men and women. It's just that, the bell curve among women is more to the right than in men. So women tend to ruminate more. It's not that there aren't men who over-examine and ruminate, and there aren't women who don't do that at all. On average, women tend to do that more. And they pay a price for it, because very often the right way to deal with a challenge, with difficulty and with hardship is not through rumination. It's actually by looking outwards, or even more so by acting outwards. So sometimes, feeling down, the best way to deal with it is, just go out with friends and, hang out, or go out and dance. Sometimes a lot better than, thinking and rethinking and analyzing and reanalyzing. Men naturally.
Let me ask you before you get to men, because I have a personal interest in asking you this question.
Go for it.
I find that I ruminate because I am uncomfortable with ambiguity. I want an answer, and Good. So I will continue to ruminate or analyze or think about it. Sometimes obsessively, based on wanting closure to whatever is that's creating ambiguity?
Great. I'm glad you asked that because, and especially you're using the words, wanting closure, which is of course very important, or to put it in psychological language, a sense of coherence around an episode or an experience. So here is where the answer lies. The answer is that most people have the illusion that rumination leads to more clarity. It actually usually doesn't. What leads to more clarity is, rather than rumination, writing about it and or talking about it. So these are when we are dealing with difficulties and hardship, and by the way, this is Karen Horney's idea, or she first talked about it. Write it down. She had a whole book on self-analysis. Write it down. If you can't go to a therapist, next best thing, or talk about it rather than just think about it and keep it here.
This is good information. I got something very important and personal out of this podcast. And what about men?
So men, again, they tend to act out more, which can be helpful. The issue with men, though, and the reason why they sometimes fail to fulfill their potential for happiness is because they're not open about their emotions. They're less likely to share, to open up with their best friend. Now, it's interesting, this a bit of a tangential point here, but there's research showing that in general, relationships, long-term relationships contribute to well-being. And again, whether it's marriage or cohabitation, it doesn't matter, but long-term relationship contribute, not a lot, but they contribute to happiness for both men and women. The thing, though, is that men benefit more from long-term relationships than women do.
Really? Why is that?
Yeah, so here is why. Because women generally tend to share more so with their BFF and with their with other people. Men tend to be more close. Why? Because it's not masculine, so to speak, to open up or to be weak. So they're strong, they're macho, they keep it in. Now, what happens in a close, long-term, intimate relationship? Gradually, slowly, men open up more and more. And again, not in all relationships, but in many relationships, this is the first time when they actually talk about how they feel and their fears and their anxieties and insecurities and so on. And when they talk about it, levels of happiness increase.
Fascinating.
Whereas with women, they've already done that with their, BFF from college.
Yeah. This is just, I'm trying to keep the conversation focused on inclusion, on the connection between happiness and inclusion. But this is a topic that could go on. And frankly, I hope it does, in the sense that I hope that people who see this podcast sign up for your Happiness Academy. And we'll have to make sure that we give them the website to do that at the end of this podcast. So we're coming close to our close, so I think my closing question will be, what suggestions do you have relative to being more inclusive as a way to promote personal fulfillment and happiness?
Good. Yes. So, Denise, going back to something that you mentioned earlier, the first step is understanding the benefits, the personal benefits, the organizational benefits, and societal benefits of inclusion, of openness, of diversity. There's so much research today. Again, today it's a no-brainer that inclusion is good, is good for the organization, it's good for the person. But it's an important first step to establish the value of it, the within, what's in it for me of inclusion. So that's the first step. The second step, and that is a more difficult step, because just knowing that it so is not enough. And you were talking about this, this is why you have the app. This is why you have reminders for people. When I think about change, I think about the 3 R's of change. You have the 3 R's of learning: reading, writing, arithmetic. Well, the 3 R's of change.
That our model is the 3 R's of inclusion. I just thought I had to throw that in there.
Oh, wow. Oh, good. So the 3 R's of change are, reminders, repetition, and rituals. Reminders, repetition, and rituals. So first of all, you need to remind yourself initially, if it's not second nature to you, if you weren't reminded by, your parents, as I was over and over again through their behavior, then yeah, you need external reminders. Nothing wrong with that. Second, you need to do it over and over again, because when you do it over and over again, you're creating a ritual. You're creating, literally, neural pathways are changing when you repeat an activity, whether it's a tennis stroke over and over again or asking questions over and over again.
That's why we developed the app for that.
Exactly. That's why people talk about technology and how destructive and hurtful it is. And, you're right, too much technology is not good, and we need face-to-face and all that. However, technology has great potential benefits. One of them is that it can remind us. It can be there over and over again when we don't have our parents to do so. Brush your teeth, brush your teeth. We have the app to remind us and create rituals to literally carve out new neural pathways. Because when a teacher calls on a boy rather than a girl in class, it's not because the teacher is a bad person. It's because there are neural pathways in their brain that have been habituated to do so. This is what they observed in their teachers, who observed it in their, and so on and so on.
New patterns have to be created.
Exactly. And to create new patterns, you need reminders, repetition, and that will ultimately create a ritual.
Totally agree with that. And that is the reason why we finally embrace technology and AI and machine learning and nudge messaging, because we realized, you know what, we can use AI for good. We can understand what behavior modification is, and we can help to reinforce that with leaders, through that mechanism. But I just wanted to mention a couple of things. First of all, just because you mentioned the 3 R's, I want to remind our listeners that the 3 R's of inclusion are being receptive, reflective, and revitalizing. So the receptive part is what we spoke about before, which is not just being accepting of the differences in others, but actually curious about them. Reflective is understanding your own bias so that you have an opportunity to mitigate that, and also being transparent in your decision making decisions that are based on objective facts rather than cronyism or being attracted to people who are like you. And the third, the revitalizing part of it, is inspiring others to be inclusive by your own actions and empowering them to be the next leaders of tomorrow, as opposed to sort of lording over those people as if you're the only one with power. So I just wanted to throw that in because I thought it was a great coincidence about the 3 R's.
Mm-hmm.
But I also wanted to say that, in terms of all the studies that you spoke about, and we do, by the way, have very, very significant studies out there, and we can share those with you and with our listeners. Because they come from such credible sources like Deloitte and McKinsey and Forbes, et cetera. But we will send you the business case. So for those of you who are listening to this, we have the business case in PowerPoint form to demonstrate that we get higher productivity, higher employee engagement, better innovation, and most of all, in terms of what you said about what's in it for me, well, what's in it for you is your KPIs, your goals as a leader. You are going to achieve them because your team is going to be happier, because they are going to actually be engaging with you at their highest capacity. So I'm going to leave that at that, because I want you to tell everybody where they can sign up for your course, and then I'll say goodbye to you and to everyone and close this out.
Great. So if you go on my website, talbenshahar.com, you can find access to my books, my online courses, the Happiness Studies Academy, and more. And I hope to see you there virtually and or really.
And I'll put that link, by the way, in when we post this on our blog as well as LinkedIn, et cetera. I'll make sure that they have the right information, with your permission. And of course, for us, you can always find us on leadinclusively.com. So LEAD inclusively.com. And we can continue this conversation. But I cannot thank you enough on a personal level, on a professional level, on behalf of myself, my team, who I think would say I am a better leader in part because of the Happiness Academy, and so looking forward to finishing off the course, which will happen very soon, and on keeping this conversation going. It was just an incredible value to all of our listeners. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Denise, for all that you do.
Thank you.